Hello, my name is Kelsey Maxwell, and I'm a PhD candidate at the Texas Medical Center in Houston, and I study a protein involved in cancer metastasis.
Hi, I'm Marcy Voss, and I recently retired after 36 years in public education, and I just want to say I've had the blessing of being able to see Geneva grow from being a little kind of a one-room schoolhouse at the Shepherd House at St. John Lutheran Church, which is where I go to church, to seeing it here just grow and blossom, and so it's been a real pleasure getting to see and be a part of that. Do you guys have a question? Sure. Okay, Kaila, I have a quick question for you regarding the type of insurance coverage and the genome sequencing. And honestly, my background is somewhat limited, but I've done a little bit of reading, and I understand there is a difference between the whole genome sequencing, whole exome sequencing, and single nucleotide polymorphism, the last two of which are sequence subsets of the genomes. So my question, I guess, would be is, do you propose the whole genome sequencing or maybe subsets that are more associated with specific diseases?
I think it's really up to the person that's having their genome sequenced, because there might be someone that knows they might have a genetic disorder, but they just want to make sure that they don't have any more. So if they want to have their full genome sequenced, then I think that insurance companies should provide that ability for them to do that. But I think if someone doesn't have the money, or at least don't want to have their whole genome sequenced, that they should be allowed to have just parts of it sequenced.
Okay, thank you.
How do you think treatment should be determined for a given mutation, especially if that mutation is associated with multiple types of cancer?
I think that allowing to have your genome sequenced and knowing which genetic disorder is exposed onto the gene will provide more treatments to be used for the first time onto that genetic disorder. So having more than just one genetic disorder, that if you do your genome sequence, you can create a personalized medicine that will target each and every genetic disorder.
Great job, Kaila. Proud of you. So what is the current out-of-pocket cost for genome sequencing?
The cost of it, I have actually researched, is that some companies have the client pay about $5,000 for 6 billion nucleic acids to be sequenced. And in our genome, we have about 36 billion nucleic acids, so that would overall cost, if you want to have your whole genome sequence, about $30,000.
Okay, and so you're proposing that insurance companies pay for any or all of the process and procedure required to do that sequencing?
Yes, I think it would be better for the person to have a choice of having your whole genome sequenced or part of it.
Okay, so then once they are sequenced, who owns that information?
Usually it would be the company that you had your genome sequenced done with.
I have a follow-up question to the cost. I've read that the cost is dramatically decreasing, that I think that original study that was done, the genome sequencing project cost I don't know, hundreds of millions of dollars, or I probably have that number wrong, but lots of money. And then the cost dropped to about $10,000, and now, as you mentioned, the $5,000. What I'm wondering is, do you think that we need to wait for further advances in the sequencing project and maybe more companies coming on board so that that cost has lessened to the point that it's affordable for insurance companies and individuals to do that? In other words, should we hold off until the cost drops?
I think that if we hold off, the price will still stay the same, because as seen with 23andMe, where you have your genome sequenced to see what your history background is, it used to be about $2,000. But now that it's become more popular and more companies are doing it, it's a lot more cheaper. So I think that if more people have their genome sequenced and more companies form around genome sequencing, it will drop the price. So I don't think we should withhold it.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So the presence of a mutation does not necessarily lead to disease. And in that case, will the existence of a mutation be considered a pre-existing condition? And how do you propose we prevent insurance companies from excluding those patients?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Yeah, so the presence of a mutation does not always lead to disease. And there's no way to know if you just know you have the mutation. So in that particular situation, will insurance companies consider the presence of a mutation a pre-existing condition? And how can we prevent the insurance companies from excluding those patients?
I think that having it not predisposed in our genes isn't a pre-existing condition, that it might have been caused from the environment that we live in. And so it's kind of almost the same thing as like if you get a cold or something. I mean, it's more extreme than that, obviously, but insurance will still pay for the medications that you need to take care of your flu or cold. So I think it should be the same. It shouldn't be excluded, that insurance companies should cover it anyways.
Have you read Henrietta Lacks?
Sorry.
Do you know who Henrietta Lacks is?
I've heard about it, yeah.
Okay. So, a quick summary. She was someone whose genes, whose cells actually were taken without her knowledge and used in research and currently used in research, meaning millions of dollars have been made from Henrietta's cells. If these companies who are performing the sequencing own that data, do you have any moral or ethical problems with their making money off of my genes?
I do believe that's kind of ethically wrong to do, because that person didn't tell you that it's okay if you use my genes to produce more medications or whatever it is. But I think to prevent that, we should have, when you get your genome sequence, to prevent from having people sell your genome code and stuff, that we should be given like a code, kind of like of a whole length of numbers, and our name with that code sent somewhere else, so it's not together, so no one knows what our genome is when you see that code.
So as a quick follow-up, how would I, the person who has gone into this clinic to have my genome sequenced, how would I follow up on that to know if my genomes are being sold or not?
I guess you could always ask the person if there's ever been a situation that in your company, has that ever happened? And if there hasn't, then I think they could be pretty trustworthy, but just have an open eye of what you're going to be giving them.
I've read that this field is really just emerging, and that some of the information I read said that solid predictive biomedical or biomarkers have not been agreed upon. So it might be possible for one company to select a different set of biomarkers for a disease than another. So what I'm wondering is, do you feel like there needs to be any type of and actually, some of the articles refer to genome sequencing as a medical device. Do you feel like there needs to be some federal regulation or some oversight in this field of genome sequencing so that we can have some predictability that's standard, and again, that maybe the insurance companies can base their decisions on that standard as opposed to just anything that's coming through?
I think that what our standards should be for having someone get their genome sequenced is that if they ask for a certain genetic disorder to be sequenced, that you should only sequence that genetic disorder.
Just a quick follow-up question, because I'm not sure I made it my question real clear, but I guess what I was wondering is the companies that are doing the sequencing, do there need to be standards for those companies so that the reports that they are sending are actually interpreted the same way?
I really haven't done much research on having companies sending information and what they'll really do with it, so I don't know if I can answer that.
That's okay. Thank you. Sorry, I'm asking.
That's okay.
I think I'm asking questions that researchers don't have questions too. So not a problem if you don't have those answers.
This is kind of a follow-up question to her question, but in your opinion, who should be responsible for interpreting that information? Would it be employees of the insurance company or an outside panel of doctors? How do you think that should be handled?
Like if someone gets their genome sequence, who should like tell the person if they have a genetic disorder?
Or just interpret the information?
Okay. I think it's the doctor's responsibility because the patient went to them. And so I think they have the responsibility of what to do with the information, but it's also the patient's request, so it's also up to them.
So you think that the patient should have the right to choose whatever clinician? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
So another question is, because the information of a genome is useless without the interpretation or the follow-up screening for a given disease, will that additional screening be included in the cost of coverage? And following that, how does that affect your estimation of the total burden of cost?
I think it will probably cost a little more because it's just that extra step that you have to do to know what genetic disorders you have. And so it will probably drive the price up just a little bit, but I don't think it should go as far as to costing like $10,000 more. I think it should just be a couple hundred.
I have sort of a follow-up question to the interpretation of the results and so forth. And I think you mentioned that the physician should be, the one involved in that, or whoever the person has gone to. What I've read is that many physicians, especially I would think our older physicians who were trained many years ago, do not have training in interpreting that data. So I'm wondering, do you feel like there should be another component to this that involves training for just general practitioners and others in the field, physicians that are general practice physicians, not those that are necessarily already trained?
Yeah, if I remember right, I think there are kind of like clinics that doctors can go to see what's new and what like new techniques that they can use and stuff. And so I think that if something pops up that's actually really prominent in our science that has been led to something that can benefit our humanity so well, that they should be required to go to a convention that will teach them about it.
Okay, thank you.
Kaila, are you proposing that insurance companies cover the expenses of genome sequencing for an unborn baby?
I don't really agree with that. I think that if you're going to do genome sequencing, it should either be if someone's going to get married and have a kid, then they should have their genome sequenced to see what genetic disorder they could pass on. And if they don't do that, then after the baby's born.
So would that eliminate the chance for pregnant women to receive their genome sequencing because of the fact that fetal chromosomes are found in the mother's bloodstream?
Sorry, can you say that again?
So when a woman is pregnant, chromosomes from the fetus are floating around in her own bloodstream. Mm-hmm. So if a pregnant woman were to go and get her genome sequenced, I would think that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong because I don't know, I would think that the chromosomal data for the unborn baby would also be included in that test. Mm-hmm. Therefore, if you're proposing the insurances don't cover that, would that eliminate the chance for a pregnant woman to get her genome sequenced?
I don't think insurance companies should provide coverage for babies getting their sequence done, but it will, if you have your genome sequence, like prior to knowing that you want to have a baby, it will tell you, since each parent passes down half of their genome, that you may have the potential of passing down a genetic disorder to your child.
Okay, thank you.
I know we've talked a lot about insurance covering the cost. My thought is that if right now the expense is very great for that to occur, especially if they're doing whole genome sequencing, that the insurance companies will pass that cost down to the consumers. Have you read anything or do you have any information that I guess, how would you respond to that? That, in other words, really, that the cost is just going to be passed on to the consumers, and so this is just going to raise insurance rates. How would you counter that argument?
I think that maybe there should be kind of a law in place that the companies can only have so much power of what they can do with the genome sequencing, so that the insurance companies can cover the person, so that it's not just up to the company itself.
Okay.
You kind of touched on this with Hillary's question, but do you think that there should be restrictions for minors? For example, if a parent wanted to get their child's genome sequenced, should they be allowed to do that, or should the individual be over 18 to have their genome sequenced?
I think since our government says that we're a legal adult when we're 18 years old, that they should have the choice to have their genome sequenced. But I think they should still discuss with their family of what they're wanting to do. And if the family is scared of like what's going to happen to them or what they could find out, then maybe just consider that your family is also someone that could be affected from it. So.
Okay, Kaila, here's your last question. What surprised you in your research?
I think what surprised me the most was actually how much genome sequencing cost and how little of time it actually took for the Human Genome Project to sequence the genomes, which was surprising because they actually sequenced the human genome under the years that the government gave them.
Great job. Thank you so much.